In many ways, the pharmaceutical market or industry is the most well-defined sector of the healthcare industry in terms of economic structure or market structure, as economists refer to such topics. The pharmaceutical industry's most dominant characteristic are extraordinarily large fixed cost of production and relatively low and relatively constant variable cost of production. That is, once the initial investment has been made in the development of a new drug, the actual cost of producing the drug, the variable cost, is relatively low. The central question surrounding the decision makers of producing is how will the very large investments required to introduce a new drug onto the market be recovered? How does a drug manufacturer get back its large upfront investment, sometimes up to $800 million for the introduction of one new drug? The answer provided by interactions between the manufacturers and the U.S. government has been the granting of patents of lengths of up to 22 years. A patent essentially grants the developer and then manufacturer of the new drug monopoly power with respect to the drug covered by the patent. By granting monopoly power through patenting, the government essentially has eliminated all substitutes for that particular drug. Profit margins in the pharmaceutical industries are consistently higher than industry averages, other industry averages, as well as observed expenditures in areas of marketing and direct marketing are high as well. The direct marketing is referred to in the drug industry as detailing, which is marketing the drug directly to physicians, because physicians are the ones who prescribe various drugs. Generic drugs, or chemically equivalent drugs, are often 60 to 7% lower than the identical branded ones, but are excluded from the market due to the regulations of patents. There are costs and benefits to the patent system. The costs are higher prices to consumers, with increased profits and potentially increased inefficiencies in production and marketing of pharmaceutical products. The benefits are associated with the provision of financial incentives for developing and introducing and subsequent marketing of new, improved drugs available in the overall improvement of healthcare. The question becomes one of the appropriate balance between additional cost and increased benefits. Hopefully, the storyline is becoming somewhat repetitious across various sub-markets of the overall healthcare industry. Repetition in this case is a good, not a bad thing. Payments for pharmaceutical drugs are largely from third-party payers, with only 16% coming directly from consumers. The same notion of the price of the actual good, in this case a good, not a service, is similar to the purchase of hospital and physician services. Price and its role in decision-making have been minimized. We have developed a system in which price is less relevant when determining purchases of health care-related goods and services. In most other industries, price is the determining factor when making decisions of purchases and, likewise, non-purchases, if you will. Such a system that doesn't rely on price at the point of purchase may be desirable from an ethical perspective, but does lead to economic efficiency issues. As is becoming more and more evident, this question of balancing between ethics or fairness and economic efficiency is probably the fundamental question surrounding discussions concerning the desirability of various forms of healthcare systems. We are constantly struggling with the fairness. Should healthcare be a right? And on the surface, of course it should be, but the fundamental issue of economics and the efficiency and the cost of services, however much we might want to ignore them, cannot be completely ignored when trying to determine the best balance between fairness or ethical distribution of healthcare services and how are we going to pay for them. The cost and pricing structure of the pharmaceutical industry is somewhat convoluted, and this is probably a gross understatement. As we witnessed in the hospital industry, often prices are not related to cost in any meaningful way. The concept worth some extra attention and discussion is that of market power. That is to say, which of the various levels of distribution in the drug industry have market power and to what degree. This is just another way of asking what levels of distribution have the ability, the power, to influence or even set prices. The retail pharmacies and wholesalers have very little market power, and hence their profits are relatively small. Insurance companies and PBMs, or pharmacy benefit managers, have a slightly greater degree of market power and therefore derive a higher margin from drug sales. Pharmaceutical manufacturers have the largest degree of market power and, not surprisingly, enjoy the largest share of profits. The market power or control over pricing is derived from the patents gained and granted by the U.S. government to drug manufacturers for their specific products. The entire patenting process is described in some detail in the text. The economic point, simply stated, is that the patent on a particular drug grants the manufacturer a virtual monopoly over the sale of that drug. The cost structure of pharmaceutical industries differentiates it from many typical industries. The costs of production are largely sunk or fixed cost. Research and development, including the process of regulatory approval, are all large costs to the pharmaceutical process and are all sunk or fixed cost once the first pill is offered for sale on the retail market. Because of the predominance of fixed cost of production, introduction and marketing of the product, that is, pharmaceutical drugs, becomes even more important to pharmaceutical firms. The variable cost of production, that is, the cost of manufacturing a pill after it has been successfully introduced onto the market, are relatively small. And for all intents and purposes, the marginal cost curve associated with increased production is constant. It does cost approximately the same to produce 1,000 pills or 1 million pills on a per unit basis. The variable cost of the cost per unit of production doesn't change given the level of output. This is somewhat different from most industries, not all, but from most industries where we expect the marginal and average cost to increase at higher levels of production. For drug producers, this is typically not the case. Their average cost is quite stable or constant. Therefore, the secret of the success is the sale of a larger and larger quantity. All of these factors makes the price-cost relationship difficult to measure and quite often very loosely correlated or related because the bulk of the cost are sunk. They are cost of discovery, research and development, regulatory approval. Again, we observe prices serving a limited role in the allocation and or rationing of a good or service in the medical care industry. Once again, the same old story repeated over and over for all of the various sub-markets. Prices have been minimized in their role, unlike most markets. This table is enlightening in that it lists the historical breakdown of the use of funds, or where revenues received by pharmaceutical companies are applied, or a very crude approximation of cost of production in plus profits. Research and development is extremely high as compared with overall industry average. The R&D component of funds utilized in pharmaceutical industries is approximately 4 times of that of non-pharmaceutical firms. Pharmaceutical firms have continually been ranked number 1 in terms of profitability as a percentage of goods sold. Banking has consistently ranked number 2, at least until very recently, and its profit levels are about 2/3 that of the pharmaceutical industry. So clearly, even with the information published by the drug industry itself, it enjoys relatively high profits, actually quite high profits. Promotion, advertising, and detailing as mentioned in the text is the personalized selling or marketing to physicians, account for nearly 1/3 of all funds received. This is a very high ratio and brings into question whether such activity is excessive. Is too much money being devoted to promoting and marketing the products? Once again, this ties into the structure or the cost structure of the industry. Since the variable cost of production, the marginal cost, is relatively flat or constant once it's introduced onto the market, it is crucial for profits that output be expanded, because the cost of output does not go up on a per unit basis. Of course, total cost goes up, but on a per unit basis it does not go up. So it's in the interest of the pharmaceutical manufacturers to expand their sales, more so than a normal industry, which you would expect increasing cost as volume of output increased. In order to better understand the workings of the pharmaceutical drug industry, the crucial role, importance, and complexity involved in the broad category of research and development must be analyzed. Much discussion regarding the behavior, efficiency, cost, and simply put, appropriateness of the industry revolves around research and development. The cost of bringing a new drug onto the U.S. market are huge, as much as $800 million per new drug, and up to 22 years in the time from first being discovered until actually offered for sale. The question facing the drug manufacturer becomes one of the probability of recouping such enormous investments into the development of a new drug, and is central to any discussion of possible advantageous changes to the industry, changes forced upon them by the government, potentially anyway. By granting patents of up to 22 years from the time of discovery of a new drug or a potential new drug, the government is granting monopoly rights or monopoly power to patent holders, the manufacturers of the specific drug. With monopoly power comes monopoly profits, to varying degrees at least. And how high should these profits be? The trade-off is one of providing incentives for development of new drugs and the increased cost because of monopoly pricing. What is the appropriate balance between incentives for production of new drugs, which certainly are beneficial, and the cost imposed upon society because of monopoly pricing granted by the government? And how can this proper balance or level of profits be determined? Because of the rather weak correlation between cost and prices charged and the relatively large profit margins, prices paid by various purchasing groups of pharmaceutical drugs vary widely. Prices are negotiated, to some degree at least, with patients who are the ultimate users, typically having no input or impact on prices charged. The government is the single largest group purchaser of drugs, with insurance companies and PBMs taken together purchasing nearly as large a quantity. And the distinction between insurance companies and PBMs is often blurred. The prices charged to various purchasing groups, and hence the distribution or division of profits, is in fact a negotiated process depending upon the degree of power within the market. Large profit margins exist with many patented branded drugs. The entry of managed care organizations into the market, which as we recall is a type of insurance, health insurance, has introduced a certain degree of price competition. Managed care organizations attempt to reduce costs in order to lower health insurance premiums to attract members. HMOs are the primary force within the market, leading to a greater use of generic drugs, non-patented, chemically equivalent drugs. Generics are often 60 to 70% less expensive than the branded counterparts. In terms of economics, managed care increases the elasticity of demand for the pharmaceutical drug. Managed care organizations have access and the ability to digest information and identify substitutes for the branded patented drugs. This allows a greater choice because it increases the number of substitutes, and elasticity, the primary factor determining how elastic any good or service is, are the available number of substitutes. Therefore, a patented drug has relatively limited substitutes, thereby allowing higher prices to be charged. The demand is much more inelastic. If any purchasing organization is able to identify substitutes, the demand becomes more elastic. You can think of it in terms of the demand curve being flatter, which reduces the ability to charge higher prices. Drug manufacturers faced with more substitutes may respond in several ways to the increased competition, possibly lowering the price, in some instances even going from prescribed to over-the-counter in order to effect a lower price and increase quantity demanded, or they simply may increase the amount or the degree of non-price competition through increased marketing efforts.